This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horrors, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week we're talking with J.B. McLaurin about his new book, Black Echoes. J.B. lives in Huntsville, Alabama with his wife, 2 kids, and 2 dogs. When not working as an attorney, he runs, listens to records, reads crime fiction, horror and thrillers, and plays drums in local alt metal band Impossible Machine. Welcome to the show, JB.
Thanks for having me.
Icebreaker question, which is fitting since you are currently snowed in. What would you pick as your theme song?
I'm not going to do the first thing that popped in my head because I wanted to say the Halloween theme by John Carpenter. Michael Myers already has that, so I can't.
Yeah, that one's claimed.
That's fine. Yeah. So, I'm going to go with Tools 46 and 2.
Nice.
Just love that song. Have since I was a kid. Still listen to it. So I'm going with that one.
So what got you into horror as a kid?
I'd say my first introduction was probably like we had just been talking off mic earlier about Are You Afraid of the Dark? Was definitely one of my first intros, but my first real big plunge was one summer. I can't remember how old I was, but I couldn't drive yet. My mom had a babysitter watching us, and she would drive us to Blockbuster. And I started renting the Halloween movies. As soon as I got done with 1, I went right to 2, skipped 3. I actually didn't watch 3 till just a few years ago because I had this stubborn loyalty to Michael Myers. But then watched Halloween 3 and loved it recently, but worked my way through all of them. At the time, I think only the 6 had come out, The Curse of Michael Myers. And then I just continued on with H2O. Yeah, that Halloween, Michael Myers was the one that really got me into horror.
That's interesting because I can draw a connection there between Michael Myers and the antagonist of your book pretty clearly.
Oh, yeah, that wasn't an accident. My 2 favorite villains of all time are Michael Myers, which, it's not like I'm in the minority there. He's one of the greatest villains of all time for lots of different reasons. But I wanted to do a mix of that Michael Myers, that there's no reasoning with him. He's just this killing machine. Sometimes you think, what motivates him, that it's this obsession with Laurie Strode, and then sometimes you're not even so sure. He's even enjoying this. Who knows? But he's going to do it. And I wanted it to be a mix of that. And I loved Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. And I love the way he wrote the villains in that trilogy, whether it be Scarecrow, Joker. I really wanted to mix those 2 worlds. And I got excited about writing a pulpy villain because I had grown up on those. And I just wanted to give it a shot. And that the Black-Eyed Man came out of that.
I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes.
He's just kind of an amalgamation of everything I loved about the villains I watched on screen or read about as a kid.
So those villains made you want to write, or was there something else?
I started writing when I was 24, 25. As a kid, I wasn't the biggest reader. I just kind of read what was assigned to me. I had too much energy. I couldn't really focus enough. I wanted to be outside. And then I'm an attorney, and they had us reading so much. I started reading a lot more, and I discovered Stephen King, and that really got me going. And then I found myself with some downtime at the end of law school and tried writing a little bit and then put it down for a while. And then I found myself in between jobs about, 6 or 7 years ago when I moved back to North Alabama. And I started writing and seeing if I could do it. And then I just started kind of with a word goal each day and ended up writing a book that I shelved and I'm still not happy with, but it was good as an exercise to figure out, do I like this? And I did. I became obsessed with it and still am. So yeah, for the past 10 years or so, I'd say I've been writing as much as I can in between work and kids and, the craziness.
Law school is primarily concerned with the practice of making arguments. Is that in the realm of...
Yeah, that's fair. If you go to a good law school, it's certainly the best education I ever got. And it was really just to be able to think on my feet and really learn how to articulate what I was thinking in a way that was accessible, because part of my job is trial work, get in front of juries. Not as often as you think. A lot of cases don't go to trial, but you really have to find ways to distill abstract concepts down to something that people can digest. And law school is where I learned how to do that.
Do you think that your legal education helped you in terms of writing?
Honestly, I think reading books like Stephen King's own writing and just reading a lot of popular fiction and indie fiction helped me a lot more in writing. My teachers are more just the authors I like. Same thing with drums. If I find a drummer I like, I listen to everything they do, and then I steal from them shamelessly, like any good artist.
That's a good segue into my next question, which is, do you think your love of horror got you into metal, or do you think your love of metal got you into horror? Or are those two things just inseparable?
It's weird. You think it would have occurred to me earlier that horror and metal are cousins, if not siblings. But I like them both on these parallel tracks, which is so weird to me now looking back, because you think of somebody like Rob Zombie or something like that I was listening to, and Rob Zombie, I mean, he blends those worlds. It just didn't occur to me, but later on I figured out these things are related. I found music first, but I think just even as a kid, there was something about darker themes and art that drew my attention. I just thought it was more exciting and interesting than Dave Matthews Band or something like that. I mean, I know a lot of people like them, but it just wasn't for me. I gravitated towards things with darker themes, and I still do to this day. I mean, I was watching a horror movie last night on Shudder, which was great, and before that, it was True Detective.
So that seems like a good jumping off point. Can you give us a back of the book summary for Black Echoes?
Sure. At heart, it's really a father-son story. It starts off in the 80s. Everett Grant, he's living in this small, nowhere Alabama town, and him and his other drug-addicted friends decide to do a big robbery of the big kingpin in town, and it just goes horribly wrong and ends violently. But during it, he discovers he's got a son, Hank. When he discovers that, he decides he really wants to make a go of living a clean life, and they relocate to South Florida. And years later, they're doing well. Everett's got a successful restaurant. Hank's in an up-and-coming metal band, and things are going pretty well until Hank gets in a really bad car wreck and injures his leg, and he gets prescribed opiates. And that's really where the book takes its turn into the horror elements, and eventually they all end up crossing paths with the Black-Eyed Man. He is not to be messed with.
This book is very gritty. Did your time working as a public defender inform some of the realities of addiction and petty crime, or are these heightened for the novel?
Yeah, it absolutely informed it. Some of the scenes in the book are pulled directly from experiences I had with clients, cases I had seen.
Was music always an essential part of this idea when you were conceiving the book?
Not at the beginning, because initially I had the idea for the opening scene, the robbery, and then the idea for the villain came next. Initially, the music aspect, I actually thought that was a separate story in my head. And then one day I was just, because I was trying to get started writing it, and I realized, and that line, the fucking metronome. And especially as a drummer who does not like metronomes, even though, sometimes they're a necessary evil. And not all drummers feel that way about them. That's just the way I feel. But that line kept kicking around in my head. And I started thinking, maybe all three of these ideas are the same story. Just kind of went from there. They all three wove together in my head. And, and then 4 or 5 drafts later, when I changed the ending 10 times, I finally got through writing the book.
So the floor is yours. Why don't you tell us about the fucking metronome and why you hate it?
I learned to play drums by ear, just listening to music, just drummers I liked. I mentioned Tool earlier. Danny Carey was one of them. Dave Grohl, Matt Cameron, Chad Smith, Jimmy Chamberlain, all those grunge guys and the metal guys. And I would just listen to them and then go sit down and just try to ape whatever I heard them do. I'd listen to Led Zeppelin, John Bonham. Okay, how's he doing those triplets? And so I just learned to play by feel. And then all the bands I played in growing up, we didn't have nice equipment. So we just didn't have that stuff. So we just always did everything by feel. And it wasn't until later when I started, at one point when we lived in Florida, I played in a church group and a guy wanted us to use a metronome. And it just kind of took all the fun out of it for me, because I didn't feel like I was concentrating on responding to the other musicians anymore. I was just concentrating on what was in my ear, which really just took me out of it. I know guys, some of the bands will use a click. I feel like it puts up this wall between them and the audience, because their heads are down and they're concentrating on what's in their ear. They were playing perfectly. I mean, it does sound great. I can't take that away from them. But for me, I want to react with the audience. And so we're playing a little faster. Well, everybody's a little more hyped tonight. I'd rather it be a little messy and perfect if I'm having a better time.
It sets up a really good threat for your main character, who is trying so hard to stay in this band and to get this band to the next level. When the accident comes along and mangles his leg, the idea of thundering through some kind of double bass, high speed, intense metal solo, it just seems like his life is over. It was a really good concrete way to build up the stakes for that character and then pull the rug out from under him.
I appreciate that. I wasn't a big Def Leppard fan growing up, but I was always fascinated by that story. Their drummer had lost an arm, and he taught himself the parts he would have played on his arm with his foot. And I think that was kicking around. It wasn't intentional, but I think because I have a very intense fear, because I've been playing drums since I was 12, and it's just part of my life, and it's really something I just derive so much happiness from, and it's a really big part of my identity and keeps me sane. And I have an intense fear of something happening to me and not being able to play anymore. It would wreck me. I'd hate it. And that's writing horror. Yeah, you kind of make your most intense fears. I'm going to make it your problem now.
Like I said, it's a very gritty book, but it also has touches of fantasy. The Black-Eyed Man is very strange. He has a familiar. They go to a place that they lovingly refer to as the portal. Everett has these visions of a kaleidoscopic Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Were you playing with a bit of slipstream or magic realism, or was this just maximum true crime horror verging on surreal?
Yeah, I would say a lot of the fantastical elements in it aren't meant to be resolved, because I never resolved them in my own head. I just left that to the reader. The Black-Eyed Man is very strange. A lot of aspects of him seem inhuman. Like, I don't want to know. It's like with Michael Myers, and there's no wrong answer there.
How important was Christian imagery and themes in this story?
It's important for me. I'm not Christian. I'm spiritual. I believe in God, but I don't practice any organized religion. But I grew up in Alabama. You can't grow up here and not be just inundated with religion, particularly Christianity. I mean, well, really only in some parts of the South, Christianity. I had a lot of distaste for things I had seen and things people had said, and I wanted to explore the hypocrisy of what I had been told. And I had an axe to grind with, I guess, what you'd call the Bible beaters. And I thought the Black-Eyed Man, he takes issue with a lot of the hypocrisy with a lot of different things, but particularly religion.
The Black-Eyed Man sets himself up as an enemy of religion, but throughout the book, there are themes of sins of the father, punishment, redemption that seem like a counterpoint.
Yeah, and now that you're pointing that out, I agree, but I don't know how much of that was. I just stumbled into that. Yeah, it's the same thing happened. I recently did a podcast with my publisher, Trevor, who's a great guy. He pointed out something about my book. It made me sound like, well, that sounds awesome, and I wish I had done it intentionally. I did.
Every time you get one of those little nuggets, just take it forward into the next interview, and eventually you can start believing your own hype.
Yeah. I wanted the book to be entertaining because I like to read thrillers, and I like to be entertained, and I wanted to have a good pace to it. I read a lot of thrillers kind of prepping to write it. I didn't want it to get bogged down. I felt like there was a risk because it is a story about addiction, and I didn't want to write a character study. And so I wanted to have a good pace, and I wanted to try to be as honest, but also as thoughtful and delicate as I could about addiction, because I'm not an addict. So I just wanted to make sure I did. And if I made any mistakes and if anybody points those out, it's my fault. But those were the goals. And any other symbolism and things like that happen along the way were happy accidents, I guess.
Does your legal background ruin the procedural aspect of certain crime shows for you? Are you like, no, that wouldn't hold up in court. They wouldn't do it this way.
100%. And it's not even that some of it is flawed, but it's really just, oh man, I already see that. Yeah, it's just kind of like, give me something different. That's what I had at work today.
Right.
I really like crime fiction that, like Silence of the Lambs, crime fiction that brings in horror and blends those two worlds. And that's what I wanted to do with Black Echoes, is combine those two things, because that's what I like.
True crime, horror, and metal. The three weird sisters, your muses.
Yeah.
It seems like your book, Black Echoes, has an argument at its core between the Black-Eyed Man's case and the people that are brought before him. Almost like very hostile witnesses. Do you feel like you were making an argument with the book?
I guess if there was an argument in the book, it was to try to convince people, myself included, to remember, just try to see the humanity in flawed people.
So, JB, I like to ask authors about their local monsters and lore. Do you have any favorites from the Alabama area?
Yes, I do. So in my neighborhood, down the street by the cemetery is this place called Dead Children's Playground, which is Hank's metal band in the book. And it is a real place by a very old cemetery called Maple Hill Cemetery. And there really is this playground where the way the local lore goes is if you go there at night, you can see the swings going back and forth. And that's because all the dead children from the cemetery climb the wall and come play on the playground at night. And it was a favorite hangout of my friends and I when we were kids. Yeah, so that's by far my favorite. There's a few others, but that's the one that I've always been fascinated with, and it made its way into the book because I couldn't think of a better name for a metal band than Dead Children's Playground.
That's perfect. I was really impressed by how many local legends that Huntsville has. Have you ever been to Abbeville?
I don't know. I guess not.
In nearby Abbeville, they have a local boogeyman called Huggin Molly. Have you ever heard the legend of Huggin Molly?
No, but I know what I'm going to be doing tonight.
They even celebrate Huggin Molly today, as you can see on the signs as you arrive in Abbeville. It's a great image here of her chasing a young boy who was out later than he should have been.
So, for over a century, the kids in Abbeville have been freaked out by this 7-foot-tall woman dressed all in black. She's as big around as a bale of cotton, and she lives in a dark gully behind the schoolhouse in Abbeville. They say that if you're not in your bed and you're out running in the streets, she will sweep up her black skirt, swoop down on you, give you a big bear hug, and shriek in your ear. That sounds creepy. It also sounds pretty tame. There's one version where she's a lost soul looking for her infant who died or something like that, and that's why she runs around hugging children and shrieking. You guys have Crybaby Bridge out there in Alabama.
I have heard of that one.
It's really common throughout the South, the idea that rivers and bridges are places where you will find the spirits of women wandering who have lost their children or whose children have drowned or who intentionally drowned their children while making an escape.
Because even in my book, Archetypes of Folklore is that a grieving mother searching for her child, and particularly involving water. And that's mentioned in my story because of Hank's relationship with Alice.
I have some homework for you.
Okay.
There is a 50s style diner in Abbeville called Huggin Molly's, and they have stuff on the menu like Molly Fingers and Golly Molly milkshakes. If you are brave enough, I challenge you to go to Huggin Molly's, maybe bring the kids. They can learn the tale and why they should be in bed at bedtime, and you can report back to us.
Yeah, I accept.
Hell yeah. What are you working on next?
I'm actually working on drafts of 2 other books, but the one I've got finished is called Ivy Hills. It's set in the fictional town of Vale, Georgia. It blends 2 of my favorite horror genres, small town horror and cosmic horror, and also brings in the trope of the sanitarium. Both I found are acceptable usages because I had to Google it 10 times thinking I was misspelling it. Well, I love Stephen King. He's my favorite author, and I loved the book It. I read it twice now, and I read it years ago, and it blew my mind, and it really changed my idea of what a book could be. I'd never read anything like it. I realized after, I don't think it was intentional at the outset, but somewhere in there I realized that I was probably writing my Southern version of it. Much shorter. It is not as long as it.
Nice. Where can our listeners find you online?
You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, or my website. It's jbmclaurinauthor.com.
Thank you for coming on the show. Thanks for telling us about Black Echoes.
I really appreciate it.
See you at Huggin Molly's. Please subscribe and follow. Links are in the show notes. You can find me at jeffccarter.com and hit the link to pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.